Now, countries are trying to adjust to the new $100,000 fee for H-1B visas added by President Trump last Friday. The fee, which took effect on Sunday, has upended the system's long-term prospects, with Indian workers expected to be most affected. Joining us now to discuss is Mike Leon, NTD News Contributor and host of the Can We Please Talk podcast. And we have Tony Kinnett, national correspondent at the Daily Signal and host of the Tony Kinnett Cast radio show and podcast. So good to see you both again. Tony, before we get to the main topic today, let me just get your quick thoughts on this. Trump said on Truth Social that he thinks Ukraine, with the support of the European Union, is in a position to fight and win back all of Ukraine in its original form. And that means the original borders where this war started. So, I mean, Tony, this seems like a change in Trump's position.
Yeah, certainly a change in Trump's rhetoric. And by the way, good afternoon to you both. Good to see you as always. I think that in this particular situation, the president is doing one thing as consistently as he always has regarding foreign policy, as he communicated to Vladimir Putin in his last administration, not allowing the United States to be anticipated in their next actions, to continually move kind of where the expectation of U.S. policy is. And again, by doing so, it puts the screws to the Russian Federation and its war machine, as well as its allies in a number of ways. I do agree, by the way, with the criticism that Europe should not be buying oil from Russia. That is an obvious answer. Then, of course, you need to talk a little bit about maybe perhaps wooing India rather than China. And there's a lot of interpretations on, how that should be done effectively or ineffectively. But as far as a change on position, it's certainly a change on rhetoric, but this is something that Trump has done quite consistently, despite when we look at the Department of War, not a lot of change in the United States strategy. The State Department, not a lot of change has taken place. It more appears kind of like a intimidation through communication tactic.
Okay, Mike, wasn't Trump talking about previously about all the lives that are lost in this war? How does that fit into the latest statement?
Yeah, good to see you both. I have a little bit of a different take than Tony. First off,
You don't say.
Yeah. First off, I hate the communication method that we followed during the 1.0 administration on Twitter, and following and chasing every tweet that the president would push out. And now we're following it on just a different platform with Truth Social. That drove me nuts. That's number one. But number two, and more importantly, there were so many mixed messages within that entire preamble to whatever he said at the United Nations today. Let's start with the high level part of this. First off, he met with Zelensky today. That is good. I agree. No new wars. I don't want U.S. troops to be involved in any type of conflict, regardless of the situation and outcome. I don't want U.S. troops to be involved. The president campaigned on that. He ran on that. I agree with him on that. The problem is, as it's always been since February of 2022, one country invaded another country, and that was a sovereign country and its neighbor. And that was Russia invading Ukraine. We cannot look at this from both sides and wish both sides well. That is not the way should work, especially for a country that, for all intent and purpose, is, let's say, an ally of ours, or at least an ally adjacent, for lack of a better term. So when I saw that message today and what he posted, again, we're all chasing what he's saying because he just spoke about it at the United Nations, and he met with Zelensky. But there's mixed messages within that message. I don't know if it's truly a position change because, as Tony said, the Department of War, the State Department, nothing's changed from that standpoint in terms of the agencies and what we're doing in terms of potentially selling weapons to NATO that NATO can then distribute to Ukraine. Nothing has changed from that front. All that has changed is him kind of blanket statement talking about the conflict overall, where Russia's position is, where Ukraine's position is. And the only thing that's new is that they could take back more land, which, if you remember during the GOP debates during 2023 going into 2024, everyone's like, there's got to be some land concession in terms of getting this war ultimately solved. So I didn't learn anything new from that statement today. It was a bunch of mixed messages. I want this conflict to end. And I do agree with the president about not involving U.S. troops or any type of U.S. military in this conflict.
Okay, I just wanted your quick thoughts on that. So let's talk about the H-1B visa fee. Will the $100,000 fee for H-1B ultimately end up hurting or helping U.S. businesses, Tony?
Well, it depends on what you mean by just like the rote gross. Are they going to help US businesses kind of on the bottom line? No, it's not, because they're going to have to pay more for labor. This has been one of the issues for a long time that we've seen charted out in the last decade and a half specifically of US visa policy, in which it is easier for a company, for example, Dell, to go to India and then to recruit engineering staff at a lower cost, paid lower wages, and then brought over to the United States to work. However, concurrently, there's also a dearth of total available labor in the United States in some of these engineering positions. But that also carries with it a bifurcation as to the reason why. Number one of the key reasons why a lot of people aren't going into some of these engineering trades is because it is well known in a lot of these tech companies and industries, your job is likely to be sold to a foreign individual on visa before you ever make it to the hiring room. It's one of the things that's been exposed in these AI HR scandals. And so this is a really difficult issue. Anyone who tells you it's not is fibbing to you. There is no complete free market answer to this that doesn't involve undercutting a huge section of the national economy on not just the tech industry, but the national security industry as well. The idea that you can just go to another country and recruit labor, Frederick the Great style, is an antiquated idea when it's being used to undercut the labor market in a method that I find frankly unethical. In the same way that, hiring individuals to pick crops because they're working below minimum wage is also unethical. At that very basis, even if it's not particularly great for business, and I'm for educated individuals emigrating here, by the way. That's why this isn't cut and dried for me. It's more of a gray area issue. I don't think that maybe on the bottom line it helps, but as far as the ethicality, there's a lot of facets to this that Americans deal with on a daily basis.
So, Mike, Tony's bringing up costs and the labor market. Is this undercutting American wages? Is it putting down American wages? Is the program being abused to the detriment of Americans?
Yeah, so I agree first off with a lot of what Tony said. There's nuance in this. I have benefited from this because I've worked for some of these tech companies. I know what this process looks like. I know what the application fee looks like, the low barrier entry that these companies would have to pay. And I know that Meta and Google and some of these other companies are not going to bat an eye at $100,000 to still seek out that labor. Who it will hurt is the smaller startup businesses that are trying to build engineering shops. And kind of to tie into the Ukraine point, just to give a personal story, I used to use a firm out in Ukraine because Ukraine has an emerging tech sector to help build some of our properties. And the reason why the war in Ukraine is very personal to me is because during 2022, when I was using said labor and they were on a trip going back home, he didn't answer my email because he said the war had just started. So if you hear some of that personal emotion in that previous answer, that's kind of why, because it ties into both of these topics. Now, is it undercutting the job market? Yes, to a certain extent. Back to Tony's point, right? We know the large percentages of India and China labor that come into this market to work in the engineering field, for example. We bring them in on these H-1B visas, right? American talent in that same profession is just not going to ramp you up as fast, and it's going to cost more. It just is. That's just the reason why we would go export labor and look to import labor, I should say. Like, this is the reason why we did it. It's not that Americans can't do the job. It's that some of these companies would take advantage, like you said, Don, of some of this and obviously hurt the labor market from that perspective. So how do we get rid of getting rid of people that take advantage of the HB1 visas versus not hurting the mom and pop shops, for lack of a better term, that just want to leverage this to, start up their business and drive a little bit more in the tech space? Or it could be something else. Remember, there's education services, there's other fields like the medical industry and healthcare. So there are other people that are going to be affected by this overall. But I think it's not going to affect big companies because they could potentially either not pay it or pay it and they can afford it. It is going to affect smaller businesses for sure in a larger way.
So, Tony, you're saying that perhaps at a high level, this may be beneficial to U.S. businesses, but maybe this is not a one-size-fits-all solution. Is the fee maybe prohibitively too expensive to you, Tony?
It is supposed to be prohibitively expensive. And I do agree that the strategy, by the way, should benefit first and foremost Americans who are here. That is what government policy is for. The base level of America first, aside from connotations over the last century, means the idea that my representatives should be best serving those who are here first and foremost. And the idea that, well, if there are these Americans And, well, yeah, sure, they're going into the tech sector, but it's too expensive. So it's easier for Dell, or it's easier for HP, or it's easier for one of the AI firms to, instead of building a facility over in India, in China, because of restrictive government policies, for example, it's easier for them just to import individuals here into the United States on a visa, and then to set up shop here and undercut the infrastructure here in the country. That's detrimental to the American economy, but it's also detrimental to the American community by essentially saying, look, we're not really prioritizing you. What we're prioritizing is the importing of labor because that's simply easier. That's not how immigration was intended to be set up in this country. That's not the idea of shortcutting the American dream by bringing in someone to essentially do a job at what I would argue as making the slave labor argument. It's cheaper to force a sharecropper to do the labor rather than it is to hire someone from the community to do so. The small mom and pop engineering argument, I'm willing to hear a little bit more on that. I think that it runs the risk of being held as the eggshell skull case in this argument. But I think that by and large, the American economy right now is coming to grips with the fact that an unfettered immigration-based economy is creating a serious issue. And it's something that Americans feel, that a lot of people in the United States, especially concentrated in the Rust Belt where I am, they do feel the effects of kind of the imported economy to prop up labor standards. Yeah, sure, maybe at a price that's beneficial, but that eventually does hollow out an economy in a local sense that I think that free market absolutism doesn't necessarily have an answer for when, for example, China, half of the individuals over here on H-1B visas are sending all of the IP back to Beijing anyway, according to congressional oversight records.
So, Mike, do you believe this move could encourage companies to train more Americans instead?
Well, I mean, that's its intended goal, right? I mean, Howard Lutnick, I think said that at the beginning of it. The goal is to eventually hire somebody that's here. Of course, like I said, the big corporations could just pay the fee anyway. I do want to read you something because I took a snapshot of it. This is from Gary Tan, who's the president and CEO of Y Combinator. And he posted this on LinkedIn, so it's readily available for people to go read on LinkedIn. Tony's nodding along because I think he knows what the statement already says. He said 100K H-1B fee won't bother big tech, but it kneecaps startups and body shops the same, and that's a mistake. And he says at the end, we need American little tech to win, not $100,000 toll booths. And it's going to be a massive gift to overseas tech hubs. And that is true, where what we'll see is that we'll see other companies that have satellite offices, whether it be in London or whether it be we had one in Prague in the Czech Republic, and other places start to develop a little bit more in those countries. And, you do run the risk, especially just in my field, for example. My father's an engineer, right? Just in the engineering and tech space. For people that are looking for labor, a lot of the times you will offshore it. It's not going to be people that are based here. But something like this could now, you just keep everything overseas and you don't actually expand into the U.S. market and try to hire talent within. You hire talent within on the U.S. side more for the product manager or project management type roles to oversee those folks that were going to come here on those H-1B visas. So it could have a reverse effect. I mean, time will tell. Remember, this just went into effect, I believe, Friday, if I'm not mistaken, that they just talked about this, or a few days ago. So we don't know how this will actually impact. I know there's been some videos posted of people coming over here from a flight that didn't know how their status was going to be impacted. I don't know if that's been verified yet by other outlets, but we still don't know, Don. So the unknown is unknown. The goal, I know, and the mindset was they either pay the fee or they hire somebody and train somebody that is U.S. born, that is here, that can do that job. That's the goal. That's the intention. We'll see if it'll have an effect.
So, Tony, what do you think about that? Could this move actually incentivize companies to relocate jobs or projects overseas?
So I do want to caution the equivocation of setting up a tech sector here in the United States with building a secondary or a tertiary campus, essentially from a second or third world ground to a kind of submediary engineering ground, as being kind of the same. Setting something up in Northern Africa or India is not necessarily the same as setting up a tech sector here in the United States. But I would argue that the fundamental thing that's broken here isn't the immigration policy and fiat as much as it is the education requirements. American students to participate in these industries are expected to have all of these numbers of degrees that are worth jack squat. And I'm saying, as someone who has 2 master's degrees that were a complete and total waste of money, when you're expected to sit in classes and learn things that aren't relevant at all to the career, when you have no on the job site training, the only 2 careers, maybe 3 if you sort of count law internships, that actually have on the job site training in this level are student teaching and the kind of residency practice and shadowing in the medical field, both of which in the academic sector, which is what we're talking about in regard to engineering and tech, there should be a lot more on the job site apprenticeships and kind of the trade school pathway here that other countries are doing. Other countries' degrees are built a lot more like American trade school programs. And as long as we're pretending that you need to go to Illinois University and listen to some professor wax eloquently about some liberal arts theory that has nothing to do with the later intended career that the individual is getting into, then you are going to hamper American movement into that field. And so the point I'm making here is that this is a half fix. I'm for cutting off the barrier to unfettered immigration to undercut the American labor market in some respects, but it's only a halfway measure there, because you do also need to reform how the education system works, which, given the massive endowments and current way that American academia runs, is just very unlikely.
Okay, I'll just get one more comment from each of you. And I just want to ask you, Tony, you made some great points there, but do you think that this move is too abrupt?
Too abrupt. No. And the reason I say no is because stagnation is best destabilized away from the worship of the status quo. And I don't think the idea that staying in the same way and just expecting that we have to get everything solved all at once before we move forward is something that's ever worked in American policy a single time. So I would say in this case, I don't think it's too abrupt.
Okay, Mike, final thoughts.
Yeah, TBD, to be determined. It's not rocket science. We don't know. This thing just got signed in Friday.
Rocket science.
I will
Nice.
agree. I will agree with Tony on the overarching premise. And you stole my thunder, Tony. I wrote it down. We have too many majors out there that don't correlate or don't translate to job success. And we have too many classes out there. I 100% agree with that. Anybody who doesn't tell you that, I highly encourage you to just go look up the majors that are available at any college campus. I went to Rutgers University, 50,000 kids. Some of those kids are graduating in things that they will never work a day in their life in, and they're having classes devoted to that. I had Intro to Old Testament. Do you see me as a pastor right now, Don? No, I did not. I did not.
Intro to OT is a great class.
It is a good class. It is a good class. But again, when do I use that? I use that when Tucker Carlson and Ted Cruz are arguing about the Old Testament. So that's when I use it in conversation. And therein lies the problem, right? If we truly want an American workforce that's going to jump into the engineering space, again, as somebody who has used engineering firms and have brought workers over here from those countries, if you want American workers to do that, you got to start training them. How do you start training them? College is supposed to be that training ground.
Okay, good conversation. Once again, really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Don, Mike,
Thanks,
always
Don.
a pleasure.